Hello and welcome again for the third and final webinar in our series, A Helping Hand to Chartership. My name's Stefan Fiedelschuster. I'm the chair of the West Midlands New Members Group, and I'm again joined on the panel by Alistair Mosley, Hannah Coogan, Jonathan Bush, as well as Phil Dyke, who's joining us for the first time. He's a civil engineer and has worked in the water industry for many, many years, starting as a technician in a local authority sewage agency, and has worked in a number of wastewater infrastructure related roles for both consultancies and Severn Trent Water. He's currently the regional discipline lead for Stantec Urban Drainage Group and is mostly involved with wastewater infrastructure feasibility and some drainage and wastewater management planning for Severn Trent Water as well. So before Alistair gives us a bit of an overview of this week's topic, I just wanted to remind you to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your call window throughout the call. If you have any questions whatsoever, there are no wrong questions. And we have such a wealth of knowledge and experience on the panel here today. So I really want to encourage you to make the most of it and ask away. If you do need to leave the call at any point, or if you've missed the previous two calls, they are all available on the CIWEM YouTube channel or through the CIWEM website. So they are normally uploaded relatively quickly. And on that, I will hand over to Alistair to run us through this week's topic.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who are new to this, this is the third of three seminars, and we're today covering the C, D and E mandatory competencies. And as Stefan just said, you can go and see the detail for the A and B competencies if you go to the YouTube channel. So what we're going to do today, we're going to first of all a brief introduction, just tell you why we're all here, mandatory competencies, what they're all about, just a quick update for those of you who have seen it last time, but I thought I would rattle through the slides again just to make sure you while we're doing this. And then we're going to work our way through the C competencies first, with a quick overview of the chartered engineer and chartered environmentalist competencies. And then we'll do the D and E competencies together. And again, a brief overview of the C Eng and CM competencies. CIWEM also does offer a registration with the chartered scientist, with the Science Council, and but we don't have time to cover that today, but I do have a slide pack which I keep promising to make available. Stefan, I will make that available, and then any of you who are interested in chartered scientists, I will let you have that pack and you can work through that yourself. So without further ado, let's a quick reminder about what the mandatory competencies are. So they're there to demonstrate professional practice, interpersonal skills and management of interpersonal skills that are considered common to and necessary for chartership. I just need to move the screen out of the way, that's better, so I can see what I'm talking about. There we go. We group our competencies into 5 areas, A, B, C and D, and they broadly encapsulate all the qualities of a professional person. And they've been developed over a number of years, and we actually led the way with this competency framework for chartership throughout the industry. Competence means the ability to perform the tasks and roles required in an area of responsibility, that's an important word, responsibility, to the expected standard in your area of work or specialism. And the final important one is without supervision. So when you go for your chartership, we are expecting you to be in a responsible position where you have some accountability and where you're not supervised directly for the work that you do. That is what chartership is trying to measure. So in terms of professional standards, these are the sort of 5 areas that we measure you against. So naught is not aware, through aware. These are all accumulated through experience, and where we're looking to see you operating is being competent without supervision. And some of you may come to this late, you may already be experts. I don't personally believe there's such a thing as an expert, you just know a bit more than everybody else. But we are looking to be at level 4 in all 14 of the CIWEM competencies and all of the C Eng and CM ones as well. So it's all about experience and learning. This is what we're on, the journey we're on. The 5 groups, well, we've already looked at the A competencies last week and the B competencies. This week we're looking at the C competencies, safe and effective working practices. the D competencies, communication and professional ethics, and finally the E competencies, which focus on professional development. And after today, you will have now had all of the guidance offered to you through these presentations, so you should be in a good position now to really start thinking about preparing your chartership application. So what does a C competence mean? Well, like the B competencies, I think they're very much about doing the day job, okay? And what they're measuring is being able to manage resources and projects effectively, being able to work safely and effectively and understand safe systems of work. This is an important one, understand safe systems of work. It isn't just about your personal safety, it's about the safety of those around you, who are working with you, and the fact that the business you operate with should have a safe system of work. Being able to adopt sustainability principles in all that you do. That means in all of the advice that you give, in all of the work you do for your company, and also what you do at home personally. And being able to operate to quality standards and principles and understanding what that really means and what the benefits are. So those are the 4 CIWEM C competencies. So let's look at C1 first, safe and effective working practices. So this is about being able to manage resources. Now, resources can be anything. The obvious one is people, but it could be if you're managing a plant firm, it could be all of the equipment that you're running. If you're running a flow survey company, how do you manage your do this for Phil, actually. So I get flow surveying for you, Phil. You could be managing the monitors and managing them in and out and making sure they're working effectively. And of course, it also includes budgets and all those things you would expect about running the operation. So the things we'd like to see or need to see in your response will be how you fulfill your responsibilities in a timely and professional manner, some knowledge of working to a program, critical paths, for instance, timelines, those are important. Your budgetary responsibilities and understanding of the processes. People will often, in their competencies, mention this, but they won't give us any real numbers. It does actually help us to get a feel about what kind of budgetary responsibility you've got. If you're just managing the coffee rota, a few pounds, that's obviously not going to cut it with us. And if you're managing a multi-million-pound budget, then obviously that's you really are a long way down on your journey. So we do need to know where you are on that journey in terms of your understanding and managing of the budgets. We like to see examples of how you've previously delivered a project or piece of work effectively to time, quality and budget. And again, this is where one of your project examples would maybe come into play, and you might just give a very short account of how you deliver that project on time. And the resources that you managed to do that and how you ensured efficient use of these. An interesting one that people often miss is if you're engaging external resources, the fact that you will be engaged under a contract. It's surprising how many people don't know what contracts they've engaged a resource under and what liabilities they have if any of those terms change. So it's the consequential contractual obligations. So that's a good one to have in your kit bag, if you like, when you're answering this competence. Now, the C2 competence is all about health, safety, and we've now introduced well-being as well. So we do like to know that you have an interest in personal well-being. Obviously, so mental health has been a really important thing to come onto the agenda now. So that is a good piece of evidence to offer if you want to. So we're looking for you to demonstrate the legislation that's relevant to your work. Again, you'd be surprised how many people don't realise that there is health and safety legislation, and it trips so many people up, this one. So try and make sure you understand what the legislation is. If nothing else, just the Health and Safety Work Act, but there's loads and loads of regulations that come on the back of that, which are worth knowing. And what do you do to keep up to date with these requirements? Things like toolbox talks, for instance, your CPD would all count on here, showing that you are keeping current. What actions you take to ensure compliance with those health and safety requirements in the planning and implementation of your work. So this is where the risk assessment will be coming in. If you're sending teams out to do surveys, for instance, showing that you understand the health and safety requirements of your colleagues when you're putting them out into the workplace. How you deal with an unsafe act is always a good piece of evidence to show, should one occur, and the procedure that you followed for recording and investigating any near misses. and how you encourage others to apply appropriate health and safety and well-being standards both in the workplace and at home. So there's a lot of work going on in many companies now, recognising that health and safety at home is equally important, because they obviously want their staff to keep safe and well. And finally, how you apply safe systems of work and undertake dynamic risk assessments. Now, I think I've said this on previous talks I've given you, you don't have to answer every single one of these bullets. And these bullets, these 5 bullets here and the previous one, are condensed from a much greater number that appear in the CIWEM written guidance. We're looking for you to pick maybe 2 or 3 of them to explain what you do. So don't start worrying if you find you haven't got any evidence for all 5. Just pick 2 or 3 of them and focus on those in your answer. So C3 competencies about sustainability. This is a really important one, and one which many people fall foul of. And the first thing they fall foul of is they can't define sustainability. So you really be clear that you understand what that means, and it's just the 3 pillars. If you can explain sustainability in terms of the environment, obviously, but also in terms of societal measures and economic measures, it's a good one actually to even bring into your B competencies, particularly on the option selection one, B2, because if you can show that you use sustainability principles as part of your option criteria, then that also wins favour with the reviewers, because sustainability, it's not all about the money and it's not all about the environment, it's about a balance between the environment, money and people. You need to demonstrate you understand the impact that your work has on the environment through specific examples. So again, this is a good opportunity to bring a project example in here to illustrate that. And any measures that you've taken to minimise negative environmental impacts both in your work but also in your home life. Apologise for the bleep there. And how you encourage others to adopt a sustainable approach in work and at home. So you can see we're blending now sustainability as being a lifestyle choice. It's about behaviours. And as a chartered water environmental manager, we want to know that sustainability is one of your core principles and that you fully understand what that means. And it's really important if you're interested in chartered environmentalist, because the chartered environmentalist competencies are drilling even deeper into the meaning and application of sustainability. And finally, for this competence, how do you observe and act on sustainability principles in your personal life? So this is the time to talk about the fact you've got the electric car or the hydrogen car and how well you recycle and the fact you cycle to work and all that sort of stuff. So what I would recommend though is don't lead with this final one. Have this as the conclusion to your competence. Always start with the things that you're applying in your work life, because that's really what we're testing you as. We're testing you as a professional. C4 competence is about understanding, promotion, application of quality enhancement and quality assurance. And here you'll need to demonstrate that at least that you understand the name of your organisation's quality assurance system, if it has one, how it's implemented, and importantly, how it's audited. It's very important that you show that you recognise that occasionally your work is checked and reviewed and that you are measured against some sort of set of compliance measures. Recognition of the benefits of quality assurance in your work environments. That's very important as well. A lot of people groan about quality assurance. It is there for a reason. It's there to make sure we produce quality work. Any experience that you have of developing processes or procedures to ensure consistency of approach to a required standard. Okay, so we get a lot of this from in the Environment Agency actually, which has been really good, showing how they work to a consistent standard of delivery when they're making recommendations in the field. That's all part of quality. And this is a really important one for anybody working in sort of hydraulic modelling, computer simulations, your approach to the use of third-party data and what you do to ensure its integrity. You're not just adopting what's being given and trying to run with it. You actually have a process to make sure that it's the information you're being given is good. And finally, how do you promote to your colleagues the principles of and adherence to quality assurance procedures? And of course, if your company has a QA system, that makes it all the easier because you've got something to explain it with. So just taking a quick look at the chartered engineer competencies now. Again, they are about doing the day job and being effective in your work. So the C1 competencies are planning for effective project implementation. They will be really looking for a good understanding of programming here, understanding Gantt charts, resource management, critical paths, all that sort of thing. So these are good things to have in your C1 answer. So very slightly different. Can you see, I was explaining this last week, the competencies have the same number, but they are not the same as the CIWEM ones. So it's important you don't just cut and paste across. You have to use a bit of intelligence here to really make sure you answer the question. The C2 competencies for engineers are about planning, budgeting and organising, directing and controlling tasks. So if you can see that the engineering ones, C1 and C2, are like a two-part of the CIWEM C1. So they're looking for more detail here. The C3 one is about leading teams and developing staff. There's a big focus in the engineering one in showing how you develop the staff along with you to meet these technical and managerial needs. So there's again, this is a resource management one, which could be part of CIWEM C1, but it needs a more fulsome answer. And then the final one, C4, bringing about continuous improvement through quality management. This is quite well aligned with CIWEM's C4 on quality, but there's a big focus here on continuous improvement. So it isn't just about understanding and working to a quality assurance system. It's about demonstrating how you understand how that brings about continuous improvement. The Chartered Environmentalist competencies, you'll see there's only 2 of them for C. And they are very much aligned with CIWEM's D competencies, as we're going to see in a minute. So society and the environment are very interested in your ability to communicate the environmental case. So they put a big emphasis on communication for a particular cause. And they're looking for you to be able to do that confidently, clearly, autonomously and competently. And the C2 competence is about your ability to negotiate with other organisations and handle conflict. Because they recognise that if you're going out talking to a farmer and you want to encourage him to do something more sustainable that's going to cost him money, you're going to have to be a pretty good negotiator to persuade him to come on side with you, to spend more money but to protect the environment. I don't mean to do farmers down, just use that as an example there to try and illustrate the point. So this is very important, the C2, it's your negotiation skills and being able to get your point across based on sustainability principles. So now we're going to look at the D and E competencies together and what they aim to achieve. So what are we looking for? Your wider professional attributes, and in particular, being able to communicate with people effectively in all walks of life. So the D1 competence in particular is looking at you. It isn't just about being able to communicate in English, which is a bit of a misnomer in terms of this competence. It's really looking for you to prove that you are able to communicate at all levels. Your commitment to observing professional ethics at all time and knowing the CIWEM Code of Conduct. It's amazing how many people do not or haven't looked at the CIWEM Code of Conduct. There are 12 principles in our code, and they are so well aligned with most organisations. There is no excuse for not knowing them. Your commitment to continuing your personal professional development and also the development of others that you work with. That's really important. That's going to be E1. And then E2 is your commitment to CIWEM and your understanding of how we operate and what we do. We would be doing ourselves a disservice, wouldn't we, if we didn't want to make sure that you really wanted to join CIWEM and that you weren't just after a chartership. So if you're going to become a member of CIWEM, you do need to know how we operate and what we do. So looking at them in a bit more detail. So as I said, the D1 competence, ability to communicate in English, a little bit of a misnomer because it's English because it's an English charter. That's where that language comes from. I suspect that this competence may change in time, but what we're really looking for you to show is that you've got a good command of the English language through your application and your I'll start again. Well, I'm not going to read that first bullet. You should be able to demonstrate that you've got a good command of English language and that you are able to communicate at all levels. That's what we're really trying to test you in. And those levels can be experience gained through chairing meetings, preparing the minutes, clear actions and ensuring that these are executed well, preparing and presenting written guidance documents to people at all levels. So if you're writing to board directors or to stakeholders or to the general public, it's about how do you tailor your language to do that. And your experience in the delivery of papers and presentations to a variety of stakeholders, including at conferences. Now, I stumbled on that first bullet. What this is really trying to say is that your application has to be written well. So don't put an application in full of spelling mistakes and terrible grammar, because that's amazing how that winds people up. That includes the way you write your career report, which I explained how to do that a couple of sessions ago. And of course, at your interview, you will have another opportunity to demonstrate your ability to communicate. So that's how the process works. The D2 competencies, now looking at professional ethics, we need you to demonstrate that you know the limits of your delegated responsibilities. So it's important that you are fully aware of where you're accountable and where you need to go and have more senior support. That's an important part to demonstrate to us. You need to show how you deal with stakeholders in a professional and ethical manner. I was a bit frivolous using that farming example, but if you're a farmer running a farm, it's hard enough to make money anyway, and then somebody tips up and says, we want you to give up half your farm to become a wildflower meadow. You've got to have some pretty good tools in your kit bag to be able to explain why that is and what the benefits will be to everybody. So that's the ethics there, sticking with your professional ethics. And how you promote compliance with the codes of conduct and professional working in your working life. So first of all, you need to demonstrate that you know and understand them, and then show how you apply how you use them. And if you can, offer a situation where you've needed to supplement your knowledge seeking expert advice in the past. So showing a little bit of humility, if you like. Just because you're chartered doesn't mean you know everything, but the real skill is showing that you know where to go to ask. And the final bullet, which I think is really important, this one, if you can give an example of where you've had to manage a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is absolutely a core component of behaving ethically. It's something now that appears on nearly all board agendas, or most meeting agendas, where people have to state whether they have a conflict of interest. So that's quite a good get out of jail card, that one, if you're struggling to answer this one properly. Think about where you have been put in a compromising position and what you've had to do professionally to make sure that you weren't compromised. The E1 competence, you need to be able to demonstrate here that you are achieving your CPD. Of course, we'll already know this because we'll have seen your CPD record, but we would like you in this one to tell us how you think you're going to achieve your CPD going forward, and also how you're going to use this learning to contribute to your ability to perform as a professional. So it's sort of showing your recognition of the worth of CPD, if you like. Many people have these personal development plans. If you haven't got one, I recommend you do. It's a really good way of planning out your direction over the next 4 or 5 years, or a longer horizon if you want to, just to show how you're going to move yourself on in the career, but also become a better professional, what you want to learn, how you're going to apply that. And the final one for the E1 competence is very important: your commitment to coaching and counselling and mentoring colleagues who are seeking to become chartered professionals. That's something we really encourage. And actually, those of you listening may already know, if you are helping somebody and coaching them, it's amazing how much you can learn just from that process. And the final CIWEM competence, E2, this is the one you could argue, is this a competence? Some people say this is why it's often skipped to the back. The Metropolitan branch ran a series the other day and they didn't bother with the E-competencies, but they really are important. We need to know that you are committed to CIWEM, and we will turn you back if you have not even been on the CIWEM site and have no idea what we do. And we do very occasionally have an application where the person is totally clueless about what CIWEM does. It's a good website there. Go and have a look. Make sure you know what publications are. Make sure you know what the different panels that we have, the technical panels that we've got operating for us, and understand how your branches work, and at least have been to and communicated with some branches in your region. Taking part today is showing your commitment to CIWEM, so that all counts. So the Chartered Engineer competencies D&E are very different to the CIWEM D&E. So there is no chance of reading across directly here. So, actually, I haven't just shot myself in the foot there. The very first one, D1, communicating English. But the focus in here is really demonstrating that you can work with board directors, with stakeholders, and with the layman. Then you've got a separate opportunity then to talk about how you've presented proposals and what you've done to do that. And then the final one, which CIWEM doesn't actually test that hard, is your personal and social skills. Some of those we'll pick up from the interview, but actually writing D3 is probably quite hard. How do you demonstrate that you've got good personal and social skills from your own perspective? So that's quite a tricky one to write, I think, D3. probably a good one to ask a colleague about, actually, to get their view of what they think you are as a professional and how you are, how you're easy to work with, hopefully. And then the E-competencies for chartered engineer, there's 5 of these. So demonstrate a personal commitment to professional standards. So you can see the very first one here is about complying with relevant codes of conduct. And then we have managing and applying safe systems of work. So that one reads well across to our C2, actually. So you may be able to use a mix and match on those. And then undertaking engineering activities in a way that contributes to sustainable development. Again, that links well to the CIWEM C3. And the final 2, the E4, again, I suppose maps quite well with our E1. It's carrying out and recording CPD and showing how you do it. But the final one you'll notice is ethics again. So the Engineering Council have decided to separate code of conduct from ethics. So again, a bit of thought needed around there on how you're going to pair out those 2 bits of evidence there. And I would say responsibility in an ethical manner is great for conflict of interest, and complying with codes of conduct is really understanding those principles. I would point out that the Engineering Council has its own lists, its own codes of conduct. So when you're answering your engineering competence, don't just quote the CIWEM one, make sure you quote the Engineering Council one as well. Chartered environmentalist, now you'll be interested to know here, there is no E-competence. So there's only the D competencies, of which there are 4. These are about personal commitments to professional standards. Begin to hear the same phrases coming out now. Recognising obligations to society, this is a new one. Actually, the Royal Charters all have an obligation to society written into them, but the Society of the Environment have chosen to make you recognise that in writing, and also your obligations to the profession and the environment. So D1 is about encouraging others to promote and advance a sustainable and resilient approach by understanding their responsibility for environmental damage and improvement. So that can actually link quite nicely back to our A1, actually. There's things in there that map across to A1. So it's understanding your wider responsibilities, and then how do you encourage other people to listen to you and adopt better sustainable practices. D2, taking responsibility for personal development. So this is about your CPD really, and working towards and securing change and improvements for a sustainable future. So this is, if you like, CPD mapped sustainability. That's what we're trying to achieve here. The D3 competencies, demonstrating an understanding of environmental ethical dilemmas, of which there are plenty at the moment, aren't there? Plastics are probably a good one to talk about here. And finally, D4, comply with the relevant codes of conduct and practice. That one clearly does read well with CIWEM's D2. So that was a very fast trot through the C, D and E competencies. We do have a slide pack, as I said, for society, for the Science Council, for Chartered Scientists. Okay, so we can have those. And I also have more detailed slide packs for Chartered Environmentalist and Chartered Engineer. And I think, Stefan, I'm happy to make all of the slide packs available for everybody. And we'll perhaps try and do that this week to get those out and so people can use them. I'm going to put a bit of a plug in now for a course that CIWEM's been running now the last 2 years, really, really successful. We call it Fast Track to Chartership, but basically it's aimed at those professionals who may have, should be chartered by now but aren't. That's where it first came from. But equally, it can be used by people who are on their journey, maybe 4 or 5 years into the experience, who are just finding it a struggle to try and get things written. This is a really good course. It used to be running a day, we now run it over 3 2-hour modules, and it just helps you to really focus. And you also get access to myself and some of our colleagues, my colleagues rather, who are able to give you some direct one-on-one guidance on how to complete your application. So I would actually encourage you, if you are a bit stuck up a backwater, can't quite bring yourself to do something, and if you want a kick in the right direction, this is a good way to go. So just have a little look at that website there, the CIWEM website, and you may come across me again. You never know if you're interested in doing that. So there we go. In summary then, we've had 3 sessions now over the last 6 weeks where we've explained to you how to prepare your career report, what you're likely to expect at your professional review, and then how to tackle your 14 CIWEM mandatory competencies, and then the paralleling those of the engineering and the chartered environmentalist ones. So I hope that's been helpful. The resources are all going to be there for you to see on the website following on. And now looking forward to taking some questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alison. Really good once again. And I'm glad you plugged that course at the end there as well, because of course, you know, this course is going to be available online, but it might not answer all of your questions. So,
Stefan, you're a bit quiet. Could you get a bit closer? That's better.
How's that? Is that better?
It's much better, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So glad you plugged that at the end there. And yeah, we will just jump into some questions. If you have any questions, not just about what we discussed here today, but the chartership process in general, you know, we've got another 25 minutes or so to run through those. So feel free to submit them in the Q&A section, and we'll go through them. Now, I want to take a look back at some of the specific competencies, just to run back through. So C4, understanding, promotion, application of quality enhancement, quality assurance. You mentioned it actually, Alistair, that if you work for a company that has a QA system in place, you know, fantastic. What do you do if you work for a small firm that doesn't have anything like a business management system or a QA system to enact those measures? How can you, as an individual, provide proper evidence that you are making an effort in that sense?
Well, it's pretty normal practice these days to have things checked. So the easiest example I would give is your drawings. I would imagine even in a small practice, I mean, I know I do myself, reducing drawings, you'll normally have a drawing register, you will normally have the person that produces the drawings, and then you'll have somebody to check that for you, and then you might then go to the senior partner of the group to sign those off, so that you at least have got everybody's buy-in to the fact that those drawings are representative of you as a business. That's on drawings. Any documents that you write, clearly it's important that they are checked and reviewed, because as we all know, and certainly I do, you very rarely see the mistakes that you've made yourself, because you just read across them. So it's anything really to do with checking, showing that you've got proper checking principles in place, also recognising that you know and respect people who are more senior than you and that you value their input. So those are important. If you're handling documentation with a client, receiving documents, you should just be able to demonstrate that you've got a document receipt process. We should all have those, even in your emails. It's just about recognising that we don't just receive stuff and use it, that we do actually challenge it first and making sure that it is viable, you know, and appropriate for use. Certainly, I would think it's just something that Phil or Jonathan might like to come back on, and Hannah, of course.
Yeah, any comments from you, Jonathan or Phil?
Sorry, no, I had something going on around me at this moment.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think, you know, like Alistair said, ultimately, whether you've got a QA process or whatever in place, it's just about demonstrating that, you know, your work is being looked at by somebody else, whether, you know, who has the knowledge and the ability to either check it to make sure you haven't made any silly mistakes, or challenge it to check that you haven't missed anything obvious. So even in a small practice, I would imagine that there are people around who can do that. So I think it's just, as Alistair said, it's a recognition that you understand that you need to do that, you know, and that you just shouldn't prepare a drawing and then send it out to a client or to a third party without at least somebody casting an eye over it.
Yeah.
I think with regard to smaller companies, that is a good point. Smaller companies have to have solid business processes and processes to make sure they deliver their products and services well. And if they're a small company, they should have the ambition to become a larger company, and therefore they need ISO 14000, ISO 18000, ISO 9000 to actually sell their products and services to consulting companies, to utilities, the Environment Agency. So they often build a kind of shadow processes So it's, even in a small company, it's worth talking to your colleagues who may be in procurement or in accounts, and ask what's being done to bring their QA standards up to reach a certifiable standard. And I'm sure their colleagues will be happy to tell them, don't just look within your own realms like pure engineering or pure science, also look in accounts and business processes. It's very important in your career to understand how those are put together and how they're checked and monitored. And if the company has ambitions to be bigger, they will be shadowing those things. And indeed, the companies will ask them for those certifications later on. And that can be mentioned within or that can be done within your CDP.
Excellent. Thank you for the thorough answer. We've got a question about the scoring system. Now, Alistair, you as an assessor maybe you're allowed to shed some light on that. The 5 different competencies, so A through E, do they all have a similar scoring impact? Is each competency as important as the next? Or could you discuss that a little bit, how you weigh them up against each other?
So first and foremost, you do have to be at that level 4 on all the competencies. If you've dipped below on any of them, I don't use the word fail, we turn you back. We will write to you and say your application wasn't successful in this case, and these are the competencies that we felt you needed to get some either more experience of or provide us with more evidence. In terms of how we appraise each competence, we take each one on its merits. We don't compare A1 with B3, for instance. We just look at, on that scale I showed you from 0 to 5, where do we think this person is sitting? And the 2 important words that I said, or phrases I said to you were without supervision, okay, and responsible. So showing that you are responsible, that you are working independently, you're not having to have all your work checked other than the quality assurance type of checking. You're not having to have somebody to check it before it can go out at all, and that's that you have built up a good level of knowledge and experience in that area. So if we took at A1, for instance, it's amazing how people don't seem to be aware of the wider things that drive what they do. You know, they can be environmental, they can be political, they can be societal. They could be just things that happen in a particular area. But you've got to show the reasons why if you're delivering a project, for instance, what are the reasons? What are the drivers? Is it legislation? Is it a community thing that's driving it? It's showing that wider understanding and awareness. If we look at the C competencies, if we looked at health and safety, for instance, it wouldn't be you wouldn't be doing yourself any justice if you just only ever talked about your own health and safety and the fact that you wear PPE. That's not enough. You need to show that you understand safe systems of work and you know how they're applied. You can only know that by experience. And then you start to move up this ranking, if you like, and get into level 4. And the one that you could argue is tricky are the E-competencies, CIWEM E-competencies, because, you know, in what way is that competent? But by showing that you understand and are really aware of and apply to principles tells us that you are a responsible professional. So the fact that you have given yourself a development plan, the fact that you do know that when you do your CPD, you know why you're doing it, and the kind of CPD you should be trying to achieve. So it's showing some real intelligence and intellect behind that. And that's how we do it. So we're not comparing competence with competencies. We're looking at this 0 to 5 scale on each one independently.
Okay. Good, thank you. I hope that's answered the question. If I could quickly look at the D competencies then, D1 and 2. I want to look at that in particular because I know that they get asked about a lot, even though they seem very straightforward at face value, and you've pointed out yourself, Alistair. But I think what people seem to struggle with a lot is when you really start to think about concrete examples, it can be difficult to find something that seems appropriate to commit to paper. So if any of the panelists, do you have any advice or any particular examples that you remember as being, you know, maybe a good starting point for applicants on either D1 or D2. So the ability to communicate in English or communicate effectively, for example.
I think one of the ones I tended to use and advise people is if you've done a presentation, if you've done a presentation to an organisation, to a team or anything like that, those are really useful for demonstrating your ability to communicate, and it can also demonstrate your ability to communicate to a wide audience as well. So, I think that's always a really good one if you've got one of those as an example.
I think you mentioned there, Phil, even it's to your teams, even if you did a toolbox talk, for instance, if you're on a construction site, that all counts. The fact that you had to prepare and stand up and people have had to listen to you, it's all part of the experience. I mean, the good one I like to use is for people who work for the Environmental Agency, who are always having to either work with very experienced and knowledgeable professionals and then with lay people. And how do you adapt yourself? I mean, they're all doing it. Actually, the field officers are brilliant at this. I mean, on one hand, they have to give a highly technical report to a senior manager, and then the next thing they're talking to the local wildlife group about the measures they can put in place. So how do you adapt your language so that you keep people on board? That's all. Meetings, I think Phil just mentioned meetings there. If you run and chair meetings, that's great evidence. Put it in there. You might be running a standing committee or something, or even actually, if you're running in your company, you're running a social group of some description that has formal meetings, that's all fine. All counts as good evidence that you are a good communicator.
Yeah.
I think the D2 is slightly tricky. I think people, I stumbled over it trying to explain it, just, what are ethics? So the obvious one is if you've ever had to refuse a bribe. We never ever see that, by the way. But that was a good example. But the best one, I think, actually, is if you were, I'll try and appeal to the flood risk community out there. If you're working for a developer, the developer wants to put as many houses as he possibly can on the site, but actually that that's not the right thing to do. You've got to make sure there's enough public open space provision. And so they'll usually wriggle and argue around what the rules are and what they can get away with. And then you might say, well, it's got to be sustainable drainage. It's about sticking to your principles and as a professional and not allow yourself to be bullied by the client. So you're still standing up for the environment.
Yeah, I think if I maybe sort of add another example there from my days in local government, we could think about an ethics example of a situation where you're working with local communities and where you're working with councillors as well. And that's, I've found personally challenging in the past, because there's an emotional side coming from a community, understandably so, because they may have just been flooded or affected by something else that they deem to be caused by something that an organisation you're representing may or may not have done. So there's an emotional side there. There's obviously, dealing with any politician, there's a political angle to that. And how do you sit there as a professional in the middle of that? So there is obviously a communication element to that. But there's also, when you're advising your councillors, what can you do? What can't you do? What's within your powers and duties as a local authority? For example, there's lots of opportunities there to demonstrate both of the D-competencies as well.
Yeah, Jonathan, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that there's also ethics within your own company. If projects are being accelerated unduly quickly through your company, always step back and consider those aspects to it, because that can put pressure on the way projects are delivered. Just going back to communications, Alistair, does the social media count in that? Often projects like river projects and nature projects have a Facebook page, for example, put up especially for them. Does that, can you count that?
Absolutely, yeah. Twitter feeds are a really important part of communicating now, aren't they? Particularly when you're dealing with the public and things. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we don't see many examples, but I would think we should see more, because that's the way of life now, isn't it? It's just a normal way of communicating, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. And finally, then, one more question I've got for E1 to demonstrate your continuing professional development. Now, there are many things that you can count as CPD on there, and it can be difficult to sort of know what does and doesn't count, if you will. So as an assessor, are there any specific things that you look at to judge whether the CPD is adequate and demonstrates commitment?
Yeah. Well, I think I touched on this hopefully in the session 2 sessions ago, where we look for a well-balanced CPD. So if it's, actually we did have one the other day actually where the person had his CPD was all in one particular area, and then, well, that's actually not giving you the balanced experience. You know, some people may get lots and lots of health and safety, for instance, you know, and maybe lucky enough to have 30 hours of that. Well, that doesn't show you developing as a professional. So you've got to use a little bit of your own intelligence here to think, well, what's showing me as being well balanced? And as I think I said in the first session, if you try and use the 5 competency areas to shape your CPD, the A competencies are about knowledge of wider affairs. So that could be reading journals, magazines, following particular websites and things, or it could be joining conferences. The B competencies is about doing your day job. So that's all the stuff, you know, doing, if you've been doing toolbox talks, if a new piece of work's come in, you had to do the reading ahead of that. Those are your B competencies. So that's reading ahead of a project, then writing a briefing note can count as CPD. If it's a new project to the company, and you've had to write a note to the board to explain to them, you know, what this is about, that would count as CPD. You could honestly put that down as CPD. The C competencies, obviously health and safety, sustainability, training you may have had around that. The D competencies, if you've been talking at conferences, presenting at conferences, that would sit nicely there. And the E competencies are about personal development, and a great one, coaching other people. You know, that all counts as CPD as well. So try and get a balance. And the one thing I always try and say to people is that wretched CPD tick thing that you see on certain documents. There's not a law about CPD. That's just a clever company that's adopted CPD tick, and they probably do a great job looking at courses and say, yeah, this is all right. That's not. But you know, you are professionals, so you are able to judge for yourselves. We will obviously look at the CPD. I mean, if it was if I'm going to be really facetious now, if you put CPD as a cake making course, then obviously that wouldn't count, unless it was a cake making course linking to the sustainability of the flour that was sourced to make the cake. So that might be more interesting.
Okay, I'll have to remove my cooking classes then, but thanks for that anyways, Alistair. In absence of any other questions, I think we'll draw it to a close there.
Can I just say something, Stefan, about E2?
Absolutely.
Just because I think, yeah, it might be helpful. So I was E2's only been there for the past few years, but when it came in, I was really pleased about it, because I thought that it did what we absolutely needed applicants to do, show what they were going to do for CIWEM, not just what can CIWEM do for you. And when I talk it through with people that I'm mentoring, I like to explore what their interests are. So what might the opportunities be for them to get involved in CIWEM? So it might be that person's really interested in STEM activities, and that's a way we could tie that into the work that CIWEM does. Or it might be that we're working on, I had another person I was mentoring that was working on a project, and we were able to organise a branch site visit to go on site and explore that project. And so I think it's important for someone to take the time to look at what CIWEM does, and then look at what they can do as a personal contribution towards the work that CIWEM does. And that won't always be necessarily organising an event. It might be speaking at an event, it might be writing something that goes potentially into the CIWEM magazine, or working with a colleague who's working on something for the CIWEM website or in CIWEM policy development. So you might have a more senior colleague that sits on one of the expert panels, say, for CIWEM. Ask them if you can support them in that work. So there's lots of different opportunities. I'm not a CIWEM assessor yet, but I'm hoping to be one soon. And certainly what I will do at that point is to look very carefully and look and ask myself that question: what is this person contributing to the work that CIWEM does? So hopefully that's helpful. There's lots of opportunities out there, And obviously I would say everybody get involved, but you know, I genuinely mean that. There's opportunities for everyone to get involved, and you'll get a huge amount out of it, you know, personally and professionally.
Yeah, and I'm glad you called out events in particular there, because you know, anybody who's keen to put on an event and share some of their knowledge and some of their expertise is always welcome to do so, aren't they? So we are always looking for more possible events, and everybody's an expert in something. So we hosted one not too long ago about food waste, which is my area of expertise, and I found it very rewarding for myself as well, because it pushes you really to look more deeply into the things that you work in and day out. So definitely very valuable to you, even if you don't end up going for chartership. Okay, any other final comments from the panel?
No, I think, well, certainly from me, I think I know all of us have got long service at the branch. I think it's a fantastic community to be part of, and I think I just encourage everybody to really get your chartership as quick as you can, really, and we're all right here to help you. So just come and talk to at the branch if that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if you are interested in joining the branch as a new member, the best way is to go through the new members group. So you can contact myself directly. For my contact details, you can go to the CIWEM website, contact events at CIWEM. Or if you work within the 7 Train group, you can probably find me directly one way or another. A few people have already. So yeah, thank you. And thank you as well to the panel. Thank you to Hannah, Alistair, Jonathan, and Phil. And thank you to Mo as well, who wasn't able to make it today, but has contributed to the last 2.
Okay, and thank you as well from the branch chair to Stefan, because Stefan has put himself forward to work on the new members group, taking these forward and chaired them. And I'm really proud of the work you've put into these webinars, Stefan. Thank you on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Hannah.
Much appreciated.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.